Welcome to each and every one of you, and thank you so much for joining us for today's GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar titled EdTech Working, Enhancing Teaching and Learning and Scaling Needed Interventions. And so the Campaign for Grade Level Reading has devoted several GLR Learning Tuesday sessions to the importance of investing in EdTech. We know that technology can support learning when it helps to facilitate differentiated instruction, expand opportunities for practice, and increase student engagement. And obviously, EdTech got a big boost during the COVID-19 pandemic as schools shifted to remote learning, and the availability of economic relief funds paved the way for the acquisition of EdTech products. And so today, education leaders see EdTech as a way to enhance instruction and as a tool to scale needed interventions such as tutoring and literacy instruction. The pandemic also underscored the importance of equitable access to EdTech and closing the digital divide by expanding access to broadband. One of our leaders on our panel today has said digital equity is a precondition and precursor to achieving the potential of education technology. And so in today's continuation of CGLR's Big Bets Working series, we will explore how we can make sure all students have access to technology assets that are needed for this big bet to accelerate equitable learning recovery. While we will highlight its potential impact on student learning, we will also investigate strategies to mitigate what one of our panels today has also called the wild, wild west qualities of the EdTech marketplace. With $80 billion spent on EdTech, we will lift up emerging resources and certification systems designed to help districts and communities select EdTech tools that are best for their students' learning and the adults who will be interfacing with the tools and the learners. And so we are joined today by top EdTech leaders and experts who will share what they have learned over the past 4 years about the impacts of EdTech and what it takes to close the digital divide and ensure equity. Also part of our panel today are program leaders who will share how they have gained buy-in from instructors and families, and importantly, students, and the impacts they have seen in terms of student learning and development. All will discuss plans to sustain effective EdTech practices and investments for years to come. Today's discussion will be moderated by our own John Gompertsof, who is a longtime leader in nonprofits and government organizations devoted to civic engagement and to creating greater opportunity for children and youth. From 2012 to 2020, John served as president and CEO of America's Promise Alliance, and prior to that, John served as the director of AmeriCorps in the Obama administration. So we're very lucky to have John, and now I'm honored to welcome and briefly introduce our esteemed panelists who we have with us today in alphabetical order. And I did already post the full bios linked in the chat, and I'll get it up there again. So I'm just going to really quickly preview who we have with us today. Jean-Claude Brizard is president and CEO of Digital Promise Global, which is a global, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization focused on accelerating innovation in education. He's a former senior advisor and deputy director at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where he focused on pre-K through 16 education, and he's also former chief executive of Chicago Public Schools. Erin Mote is the CEO and founder of InnovateEduhow. In this role, Erin leads the organization and its major projects, including technology product development, work on data interoperability and data systems, and an urban education fellowship for new educators. She leads the organization's work on creating uncommon alliances to create systems change. And actually, Superintendent Diego Ochoa of San Mateo County Foster City School District was supposed to be with us today, but I just received an email from his assistant that an emergency came up. Of course, I don't know what kind of emergency, but we know lots of things can happen at school districts. So unfortunately, he's not able to join our discussion today this time. We do, though, have Beth Rabbit. She is Chief Executive Officer of the Learning Accelerator. She's a nationally recognized expert in education innovation and blended and personalized learning. Prior to becoming CEO in 2016, Beth was a partner on TLA's startup team, leading the organization's work to develop educator training systems and research on emerging teaching and learning models and practices. Jessica Sliwerski was driven by the knowledge that every child can learn to read and that there is a proven way to teach them when she co-founded Ignite Reading to deliver that instruction at scale. Early in her career, Jessica was an elementary school teacher. She also served as assistant principal of Success Academy Charter Schools and a literacy specialist at the Urban Assembly in New York City. Jessica is featured in the documentary film The Right to Read, which many of us have seen. Mindy Sjoblom started OnYourMark with a passion for early literacy and deep experience building systems to cultivate and develop educators. And while preparing to launch OnYourMark, Mindy served as an entrepreneur in residence at Charter School Growth Fund, where she started her early literacy journey at the nexus of a growing demand for high-dosage tutoring to address pandemic learning recovery. So welcome to all of you. We look forward to engaging with you and learning from you and having our audience engage as well. And I'm now excited to turn it over to John Gompertsof to get our conversation going.
Thanks so much, Emily, as always, for all your good work putting this together. And welcome, everybody. It's great to be with you for this conversation. I'm going to apologize at the beginning. I'm at the tail end of a miserable flu. So if you hear coughing, I apologize. Wow, this topic today is so timely. The buzz about EdTech is huge right now. It's exciting. It's everywhere. And I think it's a little overwhelming, but maybe it'll be a little less overwhelming in 90 minutes after we've heard from our experts. So I'm psyched to dig in and to learn more with our guest today. I have to say that sometimes the EdTech phrase, let's call it, has a whiff of earlier amazing innovations that were going to solve everything. Now, look, I'm old. I wasn't around when radio came into play. But I sure was in school when television was going to be the amazing innovation that was going to supercharge learning. And guess what? It didn't. It was dumb. It was useless in the classroom. And so, like many in our audience, I think I come to the topic today with some combination of big curiosity and some degree of skepticism too. And then especially when we think about the core values of and core goals of the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, thinking about equitable learning recovery, how does this play into our concerns around equity? So we're going to start the conversation this afternoon with Jean-Claude and Erin. So if you guys could join, that would be great. I see you there. Thank you. Jean-Claude, let's start with you. You put digital access, digital equity at the center of your agenda. It's right there in your name. So tell us a little what you mean when you talk about digital equity and digital access.
John, it's always a pleasure to be here, especially amongst esteemed colleagues. You know, your push around television was perhaps the reason why we were created out of an act of Congress back in 2008. One of our founders called television a wasteland in America and wanted to change that. So initially we're designed to really help Americans use media and technology. Of course, we're much more than that now, a digital province. One of the things that we often espouse, of course, is that digital access or access to really quality and powerful technology is a foundational sort of effort that we need to make sure that we have young people, learners, adults, etc., have access to this kind of work. We often talk about the digital learning gap, not just a digital gap. There's a reason why we push that piece, because not just access to devices and access to broadband, it's also access to understand how technology is supposed to be used in the classroom or at home. Despite the massive effort we had during the pandemic in moving toward closing the digital gap, we still have a lot of young people, a lot of learners who are underconnected. For example, you may have 3 young people at home accessing devices and the internet, and of course, it's insufficient for the kind of broadband access they actually have access to. If you go to the next slide, there's a reason, there's a why behind all of this, right? So we often push that the most important relationship in education, here I'm paraphrasing Dr. Richard Elmore, the late Dr. Richard Elmore out of Harvard, that the most important relationship in education is between students, teachers, and instructional materials. Although we added now a 4th leg to that stool, we learned during the pandemic that parents are critical, families are critical to this particular work. So the work of access, the work of closing the digital learning gap is not just the school's only effort. It needs to be looking at the 360-degree life of a child, which is how do you connect, how do you enhance, how do you augment the intelligence of the relationship between these 4 pillars you see here. And the way to move this is quality access to technology and, of course, the way technology is used in the classroom.
Awesome. Thank you, Jean-Claude. That was good. Erin, let me bring you. Thank you for joining. Let me bring you in here. Give us a little thumbnail on InnovateEDU and your connection to EdTech.
Yeah, I founded InnovateEDU 10 years ago in downtown Brooklyn, where to this day, there are still kids who go to the school that I co-founded who do their homework in a Taco Bell parking lot because their housing project in NYCHA doesn't have a meaningful connection to the internet. And so have we realized the promise of EdTech and access for all young people? No. Has EdTech been applied inequitably? And is it still inequitable in our country? Absolutely. And will EdTech ever replace a great teacher? Absolutely not. And so I think it's good to be skeptical about technology and how it fits into what we know works for young people, which is a deep human connection, as Jean-Claude said, to facilitate learning. And so at InnovateEDU, we build uncommon alliances. I'm so pleased to see so many partners of ours in the chat. We really bring together people across technology, policy, and capacity building in order to lever large-scale systems change, because that's what we need right now in education is large-scale systems change, because we haven't met the promise of EdTech. So we do that in each of our sort of brands in InnovateEDU. So I always joke that InnovateEDU is a house of brands, not a branded house. So you know our work in Project Unicorn on data interoperability and data modernization, and you're maybe one of the 800 districts that's part of that network, or 361 vendors. Maybe you know the work we're doing in Global EdTech Trialing Network, where we're writing tenets about what it means to equitably trial EdTech so that you know what works for whom and under what conditions. Maybe you know our work at the EdTech Evidence Exchange and the work we're doing on outcomes-based contracting, which is now bridging into EdTech, where folks are being able to pay per performance, not just pay a full EdTech contract at the beginning, but to actually make sure that that EdTech has an outcome, has student outcomes. Or maybe you know the work that we've done with CAST through the Educating All Learners Alliance on the UDL certification that's hosted on the Digital Promise platform. Or maybe you know our work in AI from EdSafe AI Alliance, where we've built the SAFE framework, which is really bringing together the policy piece along with the supply and demand side to make sure that we're building safe, accountable, fair, transparent, and effective use of AI in education. And so Jean-Claude and I have the privilege to work together a lot and to complement each other's work and to make sure that we're working together towards an equitable ecosystem that both supports teachers and learners, but also holds EdTech accountable.
All right, that was a great start. Thank you so much to both of you. Let's start at the top here about your sort of overarching thought on the best use of technology to advance student learning. Erin, why don't you go first? The best use of educational technology to advance learning.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about my son, Robert.
Awesome.
And I'm going to talk about being a mom, and a mom of a student who has disabilities, who's dysgraphic and dyslexic, and who weathered, like many moms, a global pandemic where we were doing kindergarten online. And I'll be honest, we were like 3 days away from quitting kindergarten online because I couldn't do another Zoom class with my son, who was hiding under the kitchen table because he was so disconnected from learning. And I also want to say to our folks on the webinar, that's not EdTech, that's emergency learning. That's not digital learning. That's not supplementing that instructional core. And so we need to be really clear about that as a sector, that EdTech is not emergency learning. So Robert is brilliant. He's dyslexic, and he's read 3 million words this year. And he's only been able to do that through educational technology that allows him to hold a book and look at the words and then have an audiobook read to him as he does that. It's unlocking reading and joy for him in an amazing way. Robert is brilliant, but really struggles to get his brilliance out on paper because of his dysgraphia, where he really struggles to write. Typing and text-to-speech accessibility tools, things that allow him to have at-bats, have been brilliant for him, have been able to unlock his brilliance. And I think this is the place where, if we can figure out how EdTech can deepen and strengthen human connection, give teachers time back. For example, we can do dyslexia screening through online screeners, or we can have kids find a safe place to explore their ideas or get a bunch of at-bats, strengthen the human connection, give teachers more time back. That's the best use of tech in our classrooms. It's not to replace teachers, but it's really to give another tool in the toolbox to our educators, to our young people, and frankly, to our parents. If I didn't have those tools with Robert, it would be hard to keep him engaged. It would be hard for him to find joy in the things he struggles most with. It would be math all the time for him, because guess what? He kills it at math and pattern recognition. But when it comes to reading a book and writing his ideas down, he needs those supports. He needs those tools, and it unlocks the brilliance of my young person. That's the great promise that we can see.
Awesome. Thanks.
And
Jean-Claude.
John, I can add to that. I mean, I mean, you'll see why Erin and our team, we work really well together. You'll meet Beth Rabbit later on as well too. You know, when you listen to what Erin just described, you still go back to the foundational work of teaching and learning, which I think is critical. And it's important not to chase the shiny object, right? Right now, AI is the obsession du jour. Maybe quantum computing is going to be the one next year. But it still has to go back to your earlier point that television did not change the world. You had a slide up around digital transformation, for example. We've seen that come to romance. We've seen that come to grocery shopping, to taxi, yet it hasn't yet come to education. And my worry, frankly, is that we're going to miss this boat again after chasing this new shiny object called AI. But, you know, I want to go back to your question because it is an important one. It's like, how do you leverage technology to really enhance the work?
Yeah.
One of the things that Erin knows well that we've created here is called the Learner Variability Navigator. It is a learning science-based construct that leverages technology to really bring the science of learning to the classroom, to homes, to product developers, right? It is a way of addressing the neurodiversity that we have in our classrooms. It is, frankly, the way to address personalization, right? When we say that every child, not we, but Todd Rose, the former Harvard professor, say that every child has a jagged learner profile. Every person has a jagged learner profile. How we get specific to that is important. You cannot tell a teacher, here's 30 kids, meet their individual needs, right? Technology can help us get there. By themselves, it cannot do that. And for those who are worried about screens, for example, again, I had a pre-K during the pandemic. He refused to go on Zoom. But when I saw a product, a demonstration the other day, it's not yet on the market. I'm going to buy it when this comes out, called Kabeam, right? K-I-B-E-A-M, which is a learning science, AI-driven, non-screen tool that teaches early literacy. You know, it's a powerful tool that's about to come out right now. The founders are going through the efficacy sort of process to make sure it is science-based. What I'm watching that BrainPop is doing around their work in moving toward AI, moving toward literacy, I'm taking a beloved product and actually making it better. Sitting with the Lego group, not only can they fund to the Lego Foundation, but the work that they're doing in digital education, they're coming up with new ways, new amazing ways of looking at the science of reading, joyful learning, which is really, really important, and bringing it out to the bear to classrooms across the world. So lots of examples, but all of them, what they have in common is that the learning sciences, how kids learn, is still the foundational work. How technology enhances that, it supports that, even to Erin's point, making the teacher's job more durable, I think is the power, bringing more adults to support a young person, not just the classroom protagonist, but the folks who are around young people, or learners for that matter, multiple ways in which we see technology enhancing the instructional process.
Well, that's really helpful. Let me press you both on this for a moment. You know that the core of what the campaign is all about is equitable learning, closing gaps. I have a question about how you think about EdTech and equity. Do we need to make large public investments in EdTech so that it's fair, because we know that well-off advantaged parents are going to make those investments on their own if the schools don't? Is it that kind of thing? Or is it the kind of equity where actually this is a tool to help specifically close gaps. Jean-Claude,
yeah, I'm glad you started with me. I know Erin is going to jump into the policy structure and what the government can actually do there as well, and the public utility, frankly, which I think is really critical. I know she's going to jump all over that. You know, I'm a realist. I'm a former school superintendent, as you mentioned in my bio. I'm a realist. If we can get the buyers to demand the equity, to demand that this stuff does for multilingual learners, for kids who are neurodiverse, the market will respond to it. So we have to get the procurement right. We have to get districts to demand. We have to get parents to demand. I think the demand side of the equation, if we have an informed consumer, and as Erin will tell you, ISTE and us working on this consumer report kind of a way of driving purchasing. If we can do that, the market will respond. I don't believe in the altruism of people. I mean, there are companies, there are many of them, some I advise, frankly, who have their hearts in the right place, who understand that this is really about equity, but the vast market, frankly, it's the purchasing, it's the buying, it's the dollar that drives to making sure that if we demand, you'll see it here. For example, you see we spend a lot of money on EdTech in school systems, not even counting what parents are doing, a lot of money, right? We just gave them a conference, Erin was there, I believe Beth as well. 7,000 people showed up to this conference in San Diego last week because there is a market, right? The problem, unfortunately, is that we have not coalesced around the idea of evidence to making sure that what folks are buying, frankly, works and does what it claims to do, and so far, frankly, when you look at what drives purchasing, so much of it is the social network. And I'll admit it, as a superintendent in Chicago, if I saw a vendor present something, I call my friends in LA or New York. I'm like, did you guys buy this? Are you using it? Does it work? Because there was not really this repository of places you can go to. And a few of us are working really hard to change that. Let me cede the floor to Erin.
I'm gonna come to Erin in a second. I just have to say, Jean-Claude, it's this notion of tackling equity issues and the market. There's a tension there for that. The tension, the market generally doesn't address matters of inequity. In fact, can often drive inequity. And this is where now we're going to bridge to Erin and talk about public policy, because if we just left it to everybody do what they can, I think we probably all agree that EdTech could be a driver of inequitable results, exacerbate the gaps rather than close the gaps. So, Erin, what do we do from a policy
John,
perspective?
before Erin goes to your just point here, one of the things that we had a call this morning with a bunch of leaders in the like ISTE, COSN. We met, one of the things that's driving us is the ways in which districts, for example, operate. The chief technology officer, very often, or too often, I should say, is not sitting next to the chief academic officer. And what is driving purchasing, to your point, around making sure that the most marginalized, most excluded young people are represented in the purchasing power. I still believe that the buyers can drive the market to respond to equity. If the buyers are not asking for it, the producers are not going to produce it. That, for me, I really believe government has a role to play. And Erin will tell us all about that.
All right, Erin, it's you now.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think you're right, John, that if we left the EdTech market on its own, we would have what we have right now, which is EdTech is incredibly inequitable. We do need to create clear market signals, as Jean-Claude has said, and they have to be digestible and easy to think about and consumable. I love my friend Joseph South at ISTE, who talks about a trivial pursuit piece when he talks about EdTech buying. So I'm maybe giving away my age and the fact that I play Trivial Pursuit with my dad a lot, but you get like a little pie square for everything. And if you're a buyer of EdTech tools, you aren't just buying something because it's interoperable or because it has good privacy or because it has good student outcomes or because you heard about it. You got to fill all those parts of the pie. And so how are we making that information digestible, discoverable, and what the evidence base is for what works for whom, when, and under what conditions? And we have to have a public policy enabling environment that allows us to do that. And so I'm really excited about when we can talk about implementation context and evidence side by side, which is some of the work that's happening in outcomes-based contracting right now, which we saw have such significant effect in high dosage tutoring. But also there's places where we need to build public infrastructure and defend the public infrastructure that we have. So this is, Jean-Claude knows I'm going to talk about public utilities. When we talk about broadband infrastructure, it can't just be the jobs of our school to provide access to everyone. We have to both ensure that we protect E-rate and things like ACP, which are already the Affordable Connectivity Program, which are on the chopping block right now. We have to, as an education community, say that broadband access and access to the internet is a human right. It's access to economic mobility, it's access to learning, it's access to social services. We must defend this territory, and we must continue to have public policy that supports equitable access for all. We also need to build an infrastructure that allows folks to innovate. And so I'm going to go to the AI spot right now, and a place where I think we have a big gap in our public utilities. And if we don't address it, we're going to be in a pretty dire set of circumstances. Right now, we don't have the set of testing or bias prevention tools or any of the digital infrastructure that would allow even the biggest EdTech providers to come in line with voluntary commitments around the AI Bill of Rights that the White House has put out. And it's because we haven't built the public infrastructure that bridges the supply and demand side. We haven't thought about how do we prevent bias by actually creating open data sets that people can test, that anonymize private information, but people can test their technology against. And so the work we're doing at EdSafe AI Alliance, the work we're doing at Project Unicorn, the work we're doing at EdTech Evidence Exchange, all under the InnovateEDU banner, are all about advancing a policy agenda that respects both the supply and demand side, but is also perfectly clear that we need to create public utilities to protect our most marginalized, that we must do this in education. It is a public good, and that those utilities aren't about not supporting the supply side, right? And in terms of vendors, we need to create infrastructure that helps them. But on the demand side, we need to then equip the demand side with a series of indicators that help them make better choices. Because if you lack information, you're going to pick up the phone, like Jean-Claude said, and call your superintendent friend.
Okay, so two questions for you guys both. One, what tools are available to help districts buy the right products, the products that actually fit their needs? And then two, let's talk about that for a second. And then two, it's not like this stuff is self-executing. You just buy the right product and open the box and it's all great. It's like your Apple Watch. Oh, now it works. That's great. It's not that simple. So implementation, Jean-Claude, you've taken me to school on implementation sciences many times, and you can do it again today. So I'm interested in making the right purchase. These people who are buying this stuff, they may not be sitting next to the chief academic officer. They may not have the expertise. They may be under a lot of pressure from a lot of different people who've called their friends and said, buy this one. How do we help people buy the right thing? And then second, how do we do implementation and not think it's just all magically going to be great? Erin, why don't you go ahead and start?
So I think there's some product certifications out there. Jean-Claude has a number within Digital Promise, and we're really trying to consolidate an ecosystem with ISTE, with Digital Promise, with Learn Platform, that make it easier to discover that information, whether that's learner variability or interoperability. I think the other thing that is there, John, is the switching cost is really high. So if you look at the EdTech products over the last 5 years, the top 40 products that are used most haven't really shifted that much. And what does that tell us? It's not that all those products are great. It's that the switching costs are really high. And so making some of those foundational investments in interoperability, privacy, cybersecurity, putting the academic outcome folks next to the CIO and CTO mean that you can actually be really clear about, what if this doesn't work? How do we have that conversation from the beginning? How do we think about what the outcomes we hope to get and what outcomes we might not get. And one, if we don't get those outcomes, how do we switch? And being deliberate about having that conversation as a practitioner from the beginning is really, really important, because the implementation sciences that Jean-Claude is going to talk about and that we have created context factors at the EdTech Evidence Exchange about aren't just the technical ones like interoperability, privacy, security, those types of things. They're cultural indicators. They're like, what is the culture of innovation within a district? What is the permission to fail? How clear are we about the student outcomes that we're trying to get? And so we have to be attentive to both the infrastructure that underlies it, but the behavior change that we're seeking to have by the use of EdTech in our systems. And as long as we can think about those and hold those at the same time, both what's the decision we're making about buying, and how are we thinking through the daisy chain to student outcomes? That's the way we make better decisions. That's the way we create conversations that privilege implementation sciences and procurement behavior. Jean-Claude, take us to school.
Yeah, well, I think you just did, Erin. So you made my life really easy. And I'm not going to get to driver diagrams, John. I don't want to bore the entire group of folks who are listening to all this. But, at the same time, when you think about implementation science, you think about sort of driver diagrams. The question is, you're buying EdTech, why? What's the purpose? What solution are you looking for? Because too often folks just buy stuff because it looks great and it's a great presentation, which leads to an issue of use, which is what you see in the National EdTech Plan, part of our AI literacy program, because we talk about gaps in use, gaps in access, but gaps in use is a big deal. I have been to school districts that have spent millions of dollars on EdTech products that sit on the shelf and never get used, or sit on the computer and never get used, right? Because it was not integrated into an academic improvement plan, right? So why are you buying this stuff, I think, is an important point. What solution are you looking to solve? And here you see there are 3 levels to this particular effort, right? And this is not fully complete. There's also a classroom level, school level work that we have to worry about as well too, in this kind of cascading implementation that needs to start, yes, maybe sometimes at the system level. It could be a state level, district level, school level, classroom level. That through line, frankly, really needs to exist. We put a bunch of resources in the chat about product certification. Some of it went by InnovateEduhow. Some are coalescing places like the EdSearch Product Index or the EdTech Evidence Exchange. There is a push on the market on us to make that even more coherent as a one-stop shop to make those things happen. What I would say, make sure before you buy something, right now, even at home, before I buy an EdTech product, I go through these filters. Is this thing evidence-based? I can tell you, I won't name the product. We have a language learning app that is very popular in the US, around the world for that matter. Then the lead market leaders, they have zero evidence behind the work. And they were pushed by a school district recently to develop evidence. They walked away from the contract. Goes to show you, right? Because it's popular doesn't mean it actually does what it claims to actually do. So these tools are good. Erin, Richard and others we're working on making that even better, perhaps a more of a one-stop shop. But what's giving me a lot of heartburn right now, John, in the market is watching with the funding that is ending that came because of COVID, right? I'm watching this peanut butter cut happening across districts, right? They are losing low-hanging fruit without really understanding the data behind the use, the engagement of the product. I've seen some instances where teachers are fighting back to the central office and the decisions are being reversed because the folks who are making decisions don't have the data to say, is this thing being used? Is it teachers and students engaging with it? So we don't have a way of measuring the use because, again, it is buying not because it solves something folks know or they know they need to ask for it to actually solve. So there's a problem there around that we need to actually solve around data access and understanding within the school system to really make sort of really informed decisions about what needs to happen. To your point around sort of self-executing, it goes back to the same thing. If this is being driven around a teaching and learning process and folks at the district level or school level know what this thing is supposed to do to support them, you're going to see really good collaboration between the EdTech platform or the leaders there and the school system leaders. Where that kind of collaboration exists, you get amazing implementation of the work.
I love that.
And I think even EdTech product developers or sellers, they get very nervous when there isn't that kind of a plan because the stuff is not going to show that it works, and they're going to feel as if they have egg on their face, right? They want it to work because they want the customer to come back, and they want more customers to come back. They want that social network to actually get more robust, right? They want that word of mouth to actually happen. But the only way it's going to happen is that kind of collaboration and execution between the EdTech product sellers and the folks who are buying it. Again, against a very fundamental, coherent use within the teaching and learning process. Without that, frankly, you're not going to get the outcomes you're looking for.
So we talked about a lot of stuff to worry about. I sometimes worry my curiosity and skepticism might be out of balance. So what you just said was really interesting, Jean-Claude, and I'd love to close this portion by each of you talking a little about a place or places where you think actually this is being done right, where people have an idea of what they're trying to accomplish, they purchase the right product to accomplish that, then they implement this and monitor the implementation and integrate it into the overall plan for learning and development for young people. Either one of you can start.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Let me start at the perhaps more macro level. There's one state actually now I am falling in love with, and I am adoring the work that they're doing, and that's Utah. The state chief of education there is amazing, right? I mean, if I wasn't married, I'd be in trouble, get myself in trouble there, right? She is. I mean,
I know your wife. Don't get yourself in trouble.
Yes, I know that,
my friend.
So we did a quick landscape. We looked at who's asking for product certification, who's asking for this kind of information. Of the 72 mentions that we saw in procurement, 60 came from Utah. Wow. So there is a deliberate effort there by the state chief to cascade the use of EdTech. Another one that's developing, not there yet, but developing is North Carolina. The head of innovation in that state is one of our former League of Innovative School leaders. And he's already developed this framework to get districts to filter the EdTech through to see the ROI before they cut or renew. So there's an effort in North Carolina as well. But let me get to the district level. 2 districts, one in particular that I know as I've been there. I'll mention South Fayette in Pennsylvania with an amazing leader, a series of leaders who are doing amazing work around the use of EdTech, even including the future of work efforts around digital literacy. But the place I guess I'm mostly in love with is Talladega County, Alabama. It's a rural district that went from 50 to 90% proficiency across the board. You walk into a pre-kindergarten class and you see technology being used in a deliberate way and the kids own it. You walk into a senior level, honors level, ELA class, English language arts class, doing Shakespeare. They're talking about computational thinking. They're talking about technology. It is ubiquitous across the district, but the ownership is not in the central office. It lives in the classrooms with the teachers and the students. And that was a deliberate multi-year effort by leadership in making sure the ownership cascaded through the entire district. I'm sure you'll hear much more from Beth about these kinds of exemplars, but those places, frankly, I have been to, and I adore the work they're doing on the technology.
Fantastic. Erin?
Well, that's like asking me to choose my favorite child, because as I said, we have 800 districts in Project Unicorn, and as one of the
we know you love them all. We know you love them all.
Who do I love the most?
And you'll just highlight today.
Well, we are also one of the lead authors of the National Educational Technology Plan as part of a consortium. And so if folks want to go to the NETP site, they can actually see a map in all 50 plus states, including districts and territories, and the minor outlying islands, examples of the digital, of where districts, states are doing work to close the digital access, digital use, and digital design divides that Jean-Claude talked about. I love Utah. We worked with them through the EdTech Evidence Exchange to put a lot of that accountability in place and for them to get a statewide picture of what was happening with EdTech tools and math. And so I think they have driven a practice of asking questions about evidence that really go beyond just usage and dosage. But I do think the places that I'm really excited about are places like Kansas City, Colorado, or New York City Public Schools that are stepping back in a period of AI, and when AI is inundating their districts, and they're taking an open science approach across their EdTech ecosystem and are saying, this is what we're thinking about, this is what we're learning, this is how we're doing it differently. And not only are they, I think, thinking about EdTech in a different way, focused on equitable access, equitable design, and equitable use, but they're also willing to share what they're learning with other districts. And for me, that's the work that we can actually do together in education, and we need to do better at, is saying not only where we're succeeding, but also where we've made mistakes and we've stumbled. And so if folks on this call sort of take 1 or 2 words from my remarks, first, like, be brave and talk not just about where you're succeeding, but also where you're failing around EdTech implementation, and ask questions about why. And then 2, I would really, really, really hope that this work that I think Jean-Claude and I are modeling along with others around Uncommon Alliance, around bringing supply and demand together, trying to make it easier for people to navigate information asymmetry that exists in the market, is the way we march forward together so that we realize the promise of EdTech and not just the peril.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you both. Don't go far. You can rest, you can breathe, have something to drink for a second. We're going to now bring in our program leaders, but that was a great start to this conversation. Beth, you want to join us on screen? Are you here on screen?
I am here.
All right. Tell us a little about the Learning Accelerator and your work with districts.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I am similarly just coming off of illness, so I apologize for squeakiness. So the Learning Accelerator, we often go by TLA. We're a national nonprofit. Over the last decade, we've been trying to build a better K-12 field where practitioners, policymakers, researchers, and other support providers like technologists can actually learn faster together to change systems to ensure every kid can reach their full and unique potential. Our work is predicated on the belief that there is great work happening all the time. Amazing amounts of learning happening from the classroom to the boardroom in our field. But as a sector, we're pretty terrible at opening up access to that learning, and working together to connect to the broader and wisdom, and knowledge that's getting developed. And that means that, to Erin's point, we oftentimes, leaders are doing this work without knowing who's doing what where, what's working, but also importantly, like, what isn't working and how we not repeat mistakes. This means concretely, we do 3 things. The first is we're trying to advance a vision for change and help people understand where our sector is in progress. Oftentimes we're doing some redundant work and we don't see how our work might connect to that of others. And so we do a lot of research and measurement with teams, as well as helping to map who's doing what. The second thing, though, which is a bigger portion of our work, is about bridging gaps to access to knowledge to support implementation. We do this by helping people wayfind to resources that other people are developing, such as the many that have been thrown into this chat that can oftentimes feel overwhelming or hard to find. We do a lot of connecting people to networks, and where needed, we oftentimes will come alongside schools and districts and other support providers to try to capture what they're doing to make it more open for others. 100% of our work is free and openly licensed, and we have a really clear focus on ensuring guidance for the sector is actually actionable and accessible for those who are closest to students on the ground. This takes, both the form of guidance series, problems and practices, as well as frameworks that can help leaders situate those things. And then the last thing we do is where we see gaps, where there might be multiple organizations struggling to solve a problem, we do a collective action work. This can look like doing around the corner research to help people answer questions that are emerging. We also build networks of schools and systems and other actors to work on problems. For example, and I mentioned this in one of the answers, one thing we're working on right now, which is called the Exponential Learning Initiative, is actually trying to increase adoption of core learning innovations focused on learning acceleration beyond high dosage tutoring. High dosage tutoring is awesome. It's evidence-based. It's often happening on top of kids' existing learning. There are other approaches for learning acceleration that can happen within the classroom, within the day, within the core of instruction. And we're seeding 10 networks nationally and then working with Mathematica to develop better evidence as well as understanding for how other leaders can actually adopt within their context.
So Beth, that's really interesting. Say what the mix of high tech, like publishing and high touch, like really working with organizations to what's your mix of high tech and high touch in this work?
So we see technology as a means for helping people who are doing really hard work get access to one of the most like limited resources we have, which is knowledge, with ease, like with more time, like saving them more time in their work. So a lot of our work is about developing, and we're even thinking about AI right now as an organization, mechanisms for us to do better packaging and more responsive materials for people who are trying to do work on the ground. It's more high touch in ways that are about, like, we believe if you want to understand the work, you talk to the people doing the work. You look at the work that is actually happening in districts. Everything's great in theory, much harder in implementation. And that educators deserve to learn from other educators. And so while we try to do our best to like frame and bring academic research to bear, we believe the expertise already exists and it's our job to unlock it.
Let's talk for a second about the equity questions that we talked about with Erin and Jean-Claude. How do you think about the challenges and opportunities that EdTech opens up with respect to equitable learning opportunities and outcomes?
Yeah, so the first thing I do want to call out is we oftentimes overlook access inequities. I know Jean-Claude and Erin have already spoken a lot about this and offered a lot of resources. Some might remember a time in 2019 in which, the sector declared the classroom connectivity gap like solved for. But what we oftentimes find is like districts do need to go deep there first, because accessing any of the other benefits of EdTech in classrooms, at homes, or whatever does mean that every kid, every student, every teacher, and oftentimes family need access to the resources. There's a resource that I know Emily will share in the chat that we've developed around how district teams can think about that, including like some really uncommon and creative strategies districts like Ector County and Lindsay Unified have used to solve some of that. But more concretely, as it relates to the use of education technology, we tend to see two categories of opportunity. The first is like, let's do better the things we intend to do, but are finding really hard to implement within the constraints of existing resources. Weimer asked a question actually in the Q&A about high quality instructional materials. And I think that's an awesome example. We have developed as a sector some really incredibly strong, rigorous, open instructional materials that are incredibly difficult to implement with diverse classroom kids. Yeah. And then we label that as like lack of fidelity, when really it's like lack of the resources and the flexibility to be able to use those tools with the students you have in the day. So we're seeing some organizations, for example, begin to think about like, what are the technology tools that can be used to supplement, to differentiate, to even do tutoring, to unlock the like richer group-based experiences that can happen with like, for example, really rich discourse ELA materials. I think another area we're seeing this is around tutoring. Obviously, like unlocking technology can be used to actually unlock teachers' time and students' time to work differently. And wouldn't it be great actually if every kid had the opportunity to get one-on-one support or small group support every single day? Because we're using tech differently. So that's category one, doing better, doing the things we think we should do, but that are hard to do. The second category, which I think is more of a landscape and a universe of opportunity, is like the totally new resources and learning opportunities we can bring to bear when we're willing to allow technology to like push us beyond like our local opportunities and resources. So access to totally new experts in the field. We've seen this, right, with kids engaging with NASA astronauts, access to rich data sets, the ability to gain expertise or engage in courses that might not be available locally, even hybrid learning models where kids get to do quicker learning so that they can free up their time to do stuff like project-based learning and internships. So when we talk to districts, we want them to hold both things. Like, how can this help us in the now? But what are the totally unrealized potential things that we could do if we figured out how to use tech to do it?
Awesome. Thanks so much, Beth. That was fantastic. And don't go far. Jess, I want to come to you now. Thanks so much for being with us today. Ignite Learning is a super successful literacy tutoring program. Tell us a little bit about Ignite Learning and how you're using technology to increase student engagement with tutoring.
Yeah, thanks so much, John. And thank you, Emily. Thank you, the campaign for GLR, for this opportunity, and everybody who is either Zooming in or on Facebook Live for making time for this important conversation. Ignite Reading is an early literacy company that is doing exactly what Beth was alluding to. And we are providing virtual one-to-one foundational reading skills tutoring for kids in kindergarten all the way through high school, and helping them to become confident, fluent readers. And as I've been listening to this conversation, the thing I keep coming back to within my particular purview is that the act of learning to read is deeply human. And at Ignite Reading, we are tech-led with deep pedagogical roots and a human-centric approach. And so everything that we are doing with technology is in service of enhancing the human experience and thus the outcomes that we are delivering for the precious kids that we're serving. And as I was thinking about equity and the conversation related to equity today, the thing that kept coming to mind is, you know, as a parent, and I was thinking about what Erin was sharing, there's this shadow system in education where the families who have the means to do so will go and they will get tutoring outside of the school day,
Sure.
Which is, you know, like, I get it. I'm a parent, and as parents, we all just want to do what's best for our kids. And yet that is so deeply inequitable because there are so many other children sitting in schools who also need more targeted support, which can come in the form of tutoring. But not all school systems have figured out how to create those structures. And so what we're doing with Ignite Reading is we're trying to disrupt that shadow system, particularly when it comes to learning to read. And we are embedding our program during the school day. And the way that we're intentionally integrating our technology into a school's literacy ecosystem, this in and of itself is creating more equity. So the most straightforward way that we are leveraging technology is via secure video conferencing. And I know this sounds kind of insane, especially given all of the educators and parents who still have PTSD from having to teach or watch their kids be taught via Zoom. But hear me out for a minute, John, because what we are doing with Ignite Reading is delivering live, highly trained humans into kids' classrooms for 15 minutes a day, every day. And they are working one-on-one with kids, teaching into their precise decoding gaps in order to ensure that they learn to read with automaticity and fluency. And so there's this tech component that is underpinning a deeply human act. And this is really core to how we are getting student engagement and then ultimately really strong outcomes in our program. Moreover, behind the scenes, we're leveraging technology, and we're even thinking about AI not to replace the human, but to further pinpoint the precision by which the humans are teaching kids. And we're even also right now currently, there's a lot, you know, basic tech ways that we're tracking things like attendance, which our program nationally, we see that we have above 80% attendance every day, which is pretty phenomenal when you think about this being video conferencing during a school day with little humans. And right now we're serving every day over 15,000 kids. So the technology plays a critical role in the precision of what is being taught in order to ensure that there is equitable access to kids learning these crucial skills. And, you know, as educators, I think we can all agree, there's nothing more important than all kids having the right to learn to read, and ideally learning to read on time, because of how much it underpins everything else that we want and hope for them throughout their school careers and their lives. And by us focusing our technology on exactly what kids need, we're giving them the access to close their gaps rapidly. Meanwhile, kids are experiencing the progress in the program, and they're seeing how they're going from learning letter names and sounds to reading words, to reading sentences, to reading paragraphs.
Yeah.
This is so motivating, and it triggers a motivation to keep showing up. And we have a lot of partners who will tell us, oh my gosh, our attendance is so much better as a result of kids having this intervention, because the kids are now telling their parents, I can't miss school. I have to go to school. I have to see my Ignite Reading tutor. And we have a slide, John. I don't know if you want to share the slide. Perfect.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Great. So, the other thing I think a lot about is accountability. And this was touched on in the conversation when, school systems are thinking about who they partner with and what that partnership will mean in terms of outcomes for kids. And, there are no silver bullets in EdTech. And at Ignite Reading, we really believe that the intentional integration of technology in the midst of a really thoughtful literacy ecosystem that is using the kinds of high quality instructional materials that Beth talked about is what is going to ensure that all kids are learning and that teachers are being supported in the ways that we know they need to be supported. We have a study from last school year. This was before we even made all of the tech enhancements that are now underpinning our program. But what we found was that we did see a significant improvement as measured by Dibbles, even in the context of a very short pilot, whereas many of our partners are now doing full school year implementations. And so this is the power of these really intentional ways of infusing EdTech as part of an overarching literacy ecosystem.
Awesome. That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Jess. You have a little video you want to share with us. Can you do that a sec?
Yeah, definitely.
All right.
Let me share my screen.
You go ahead and share your screen, and away we go. And then Mindy, we're coming to you.
All right, one moment. So what I have here is a snippet from a literacy leader in Revere Public Schools in Massachusetts, and she's talking about the way that the infusion of Ignite Reading into their overall literacy ecosystem has created these really incredible outcomes as measured by Dibbles. And this was from their beginning of year, this school year, to middle of year, so not even the full year, and I'm really excited for their full year data. And it's not working.
Okay.
Despite our careful practice ahead of time.
Yeah, we practiced ahead of time, everybody.
Yeah. But the good news is, once a classroom teacher, always a classroom teacher. We have dropped the link into the chat. And anyone who wants to take a peek at that video, what you'll hear the district leader talk about is that at the beginning of the school year, 63.5% of their first graders required intensive reading support, meaning they were well below benchmark. And by middle of year in December, only 19.8% of those students still needed intensive support.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Jess. Appreciate it. Don't go far. Mindy, sorry to make you wait, but thanks for being with us today. Tell us a little about OnYourMark and how you use EdTech to make your tutoring both successful and scalable.
Thanks so much, John, and thanks everybody. It's been such a pleasure to be a part of this panel already. And there's just a lot of consistent themes and trends that are coming through, and especially when we're talking about high dosage tutoring, as Jess just spoke about. Just one quick little story, like I'm former principal, former teacher, as well as many folks, on this call are. And I date myself back to chalkboards and chalk. And so when I see a few nods, even from my fellow panelists, when you do that, I was a skeptic. When we went to get On Your Mark up and running, I didn't know that we would be able to build the kind of relationships between our tutors and students the way that we've been able to virtually. That was the biggest thing that I was testing, and we were testing in partnership with our schools in our very first pilot year. And it has just been so incredibly encouraging to see how with, really strong training and good screening and hiring on the front end, how tutors can really make magic come alive in virtual settings. And so the main way that we do use, EdTech is by connecting our virtual tutors with students directly into the classroom. And we are getting repeated feedback from teachers on the ground who are saying that their students get so excited to be able to go to tutoring, and so much so that they're participating more in their tier 1 instruction because they are gaining that level of confidence that their tutor gives them, that it's been so encouraging to really think about scalability, right? And how we want to move and grow our impact from here. In particular, I got to see tutoring on the ground just a couple of weeks ago in an implementation where it was a classroom pull out for intervention. And at the end of the session, the tutors the students all finish up with their tutor by saying bye and like closing down at the cue of the teacher in the front of the room. And we have students who are throwing up heart symbols, and these are 5- and 6-year-olds. Ooh, I even got the hearts to
There
come.
you go. There you go.
Hey, and I saw one young little girl in the back who's like waving all the way down while she's closing her computer to be able to say bye to her tutor. So I think this whole question of like, can we do a virtual teaching engagement and tutoring in a way that is highly relational and does what humans do best? I think there's a huge role for technology to continue to support that in lots and lots of different ways. We've really been seeing that play out.
So Mindy,
John.
Mindy, let me ask you, going back to the conversation, particularly with Erin and Jean-Claude, what are you noticing about your successful implementations? I mean, let's say you've got like a whiz bang thing here, but what does it take to get the right people to decide, okay, that's the thing we want to buy, and then get the people to implement this in the right way? Because without the right context, even your whiz bang solution is not going to work.
That's right. And this is something we've spent a lot of time thinking about and trying a bunch of different things. And I think what it's taken from the start, and I saw this question in the question and answer, like, how do you do this as a small, especially nonprofit startup without a lot of capital to be able to drive that? And I think finding those first partners who are the right partners and dedicated to one, you are trying to solve a shared problem. If I'm an ed tech provider and I come in and I'm trying to solve a problem that isn't the problem that you feel, then there's going to be a mismatch there. And I think so often we are trying to like jam a solution down, a school's throat on the ed tech side, but it's not an exact match for the problem that they're experiencing. So that means conversation, it means listening, it means tweaking and fine tuning and trying to make sure that the solution that we're providing is best aligned with the problem that the school is experiencing. And for us, that has meant really aligning with schools ahead of time around what the expectations are for the program versus what the school can do, what the school can schedule, how they can fit it in, what data is important to them, what data is important to us. Because where the data is aligned that's where we're seeing the most powerful implementations. So the schools who are already valuing DIBELS because they are making that transition to the science of reading or have already moved in that direction are ready to be able to digest the data and use it for continuous improvement in the way that we are also ready to dive into it too. But if we're not talking about the same data or we don't have a shared understanding of the problem we're trying to solve, then I think we really experience tension and we don't get strong buy-in, we don't have strong implementation, and that's when you start to see it not being worth the money that's spent on it.
Jess, I see you nodding there. Similar observations about successful implementations versus places where it's less aligned?
Yeah, I kind of come at it from two different perspectives, because at the end of the day, kids need to learn to read, and we need to figure out how to navigate ecosystems that are in different places on their journey with science of reading and their level of buy-in, and whether or not they're using dibbles or something else. And so I think a lot about what it means to change hearts and minds. And there are some partners we have who, like, they are drinking the SOR Kool-Aid. They are using all the right programs. Everything's perfect on paper. And the reality is that even still, as we know from Dr. Nancy Young's Ladder of Reading, kids are falling through the cracks and they need this intervention. And then there are other places where they are at the very beginning of the SOR journey. That's real. Like, this was even talked about in this conversation. Not
Yep.
everybody is there.
Yep.
And yet they know that their kids aren't learning to read and they need help. And in that case, we might look like more of a tier 1 solution initially. And then the role that we take on is not just around making sure that kids have this safety net and that they will learn to read, but also being a really important partner in helping to galvanize the grassroots movement that is needed in order for folks to want to buy into all of the science of reading rhetoric that they're hearing. And the reality is, from what I have seen in my experience as a teacher, a leader, a coach, and whatnot, when you have the privilege of being able to watch a child learn to read with a program like Ignite Reading, where it's kids on devices and any adult walking past them can look over their shoulder and see it, you can't unsee that. You can't unsee that them being taught to read this way works, that it is fostering deeper confidence and then the motivation to persist. And then ultimately it becomes a love of reading. And we like to bring people with us along on this journey because there is no such thing as the perfect partner. And so we have to be able to meet folks where they are while still ultimately ensuring once and for all that every child who needs this access will have the right to learn to read.
Gotcha. Great. Jean-Claude and Erin, you want to come back and join us? I know Emily's got some questions that she's already collected from the Q&A. But if folks who are watching have questions about any part of this, all the way from the theory to the product purchase to implementation, please put them in the Q&A and we'll try to get to them. Excuse me. I want to ask everybody this question because here we are talking about EdTech, and rightly so. And the hottest book and the biggest conversation right now is Jonathan Haidt's book about kids and technology. And the short answer is too damn much, right? And it's phones, it's screens all the time. He thinks it's bad for learning. He thinks it's bad for development. He thinks it's bad for happiness. And there are a lot of stats that would support what Jonathan Haidt is talking about. So I'm curious for all of you who are interested in, committed to, and so smart about this technology, how do you think about this balance between the power of technology to do individualization, personalization, to provide intense, help one-on-one, at the same time as we have this sensation that kids are spending much too much time on screens and in virtual space. Erin, why don't you go ahead and start?
I do think we have to shift the role of kids and technology to kids being creators, not just consumers of technology. And so one of the big things that I think is possible is, how do we use technology to unlock the ability for young people to create, to curate, to mix, to gain access to knowledge and expertise? And so this is actually what I'm excited about with AI. I think AI, you know, like the internet democratized knowledge, I think AI can democratize expertise. And so I'm super excited about the ability to have a young person be able to use DALL-E which is an AI tool, to conceive of an image, even if they don't feel like they have the greatest strength in drawing, or to really think about, like, how do they unlock that brilliance? And so shifting from our young people being just consumers of tech to being creators of tech is a must do. And then I love Jess and Mindy's comments and Beth's comments, and Jean-Claude said it too. Like, how do we use tech to strengthen and deepen the human connection? That's something we really need to be thinking about and centering in this conversation. And then finally, the last thing I'll say is, when I think about technology, again, I think about, how does it make the invisible visible? So much of what technology can do is provide access to information that we might not see. Bring an AP physics class into a rural school, gain access for a parent who, you know, doesn't know how to read, to be able to stop the generational poverty that's created through the lack of adult literacy in this country. And we can stop that through giving access to learning opportunities. But we got to make some of these shifts where we see technology as being something that's done to us, as being something that can support our vision for what we know learning can be.
John, I'll add. I've always been a big fan of Jonathan Haidt. You know, love his book. I'm moderating one of his pieces next week in Colorado. Big fan. I've not read his latest book. I've heard quite a bit about it. I guess prominent leader in our country recently mentioned the exact same question you mentioned and suggested we ban certain things in schools. I always get very nervous when I hear about banning stuff in schools. I remember when we banned cell phones in schools, right? You know, we banned, I'm going to date myself now, the pager, right? The beeper was banned at one point in New York City, right? So a whole technology, a whole industry was created, if you remember, in New York City, where folks were storing cell phones for kids, right, during the day for a few dollars a day. You know, it became a burden for school leaders. I was a principal when that happened in New York City, and I was like with the bag when I'm collecting cell phones. That was not my job, but I had better things to actually do. So I get worried when I hear these kinds of things. I think what Jonathan perhaps is talking about is when we outsource the work to the technology, right? Which I think is always a mistake. Even in high dosage tutoring, you cannot remove the human in the center, the human in the loop. They have to be a part of the effort and the work. To Erin's point, kids are creators, right? And you know this, John. I'm a commercial pilot. I love to fly. Technology's made aviation a hell of a lot safer than it ever was in the past, but it's not outsourced. When we outsource to remove the human in the loop, if you remember the Max 8, right? Look what happened, right? Yeah. You cannot do that. You cannot outsource the work where the technology is fully integrated in the fabric of good teaching and learning, right? Then it becomes an asset. But if you outsource it, then of course it becomes this Orwellian piece of kids dead looking at a screen and losing who they are as human beings.
Yeah, it's a really strong. Go ahead, Beth. Sorry.
I'd just love to jump in. I'm the mother of 2 children, 8 and 10. This is something we are grappling with on the home front right now, as I suspect many others on this call are.
Yes.
I want to call out 2 things. The first is, it's incredibly important that we get more nuanced about our conversations about the use of tech and how learners interact with the technology. You know, we've been debating for decades at this point whether or not screen time is a good thing or a bad thing.
Yes.
What we know from the research is that when kids are passively viewing technology or not interacting, your brains are wired to learn socially, that's when it's actually bad. When kids, you know, during the pandemic, there were kids who became myopic because they were just on their screens and not interacting with other people around them in the world. And so that's just a really important point, is I think we have to get a lot more nuanced on purpose, on what kids are actually doing with whom and why, because we have a very strong history in this country of what I like to call digital redlining. We have made choices for lower income kids and communities, highly correlated on race and ethnicity, about like when and how they're allowed to use tech, that we have not made for higher income communities. In higher income communities, we are encouraging technology use around collaboration, creativity, being prepared for the future of work. I mean, we are on technology right now for learning through this tool. For our kids in classrooms, particularly in lower income districts, what we see is they're not allowed to use emerging technology because of fear. I think we see this in AI policy. And the type of work that they do is, generally speaking, more repetitive. It's highly individualized, so they don't get as much socialization and rich discourse, and they're not getting to create. And so I think as we talk about critiques, we have to be clear about like what's different between like social media and actual behavioral nudges that are wiring us all to look at our phone every 3 minutes, and how do we stop that? But what are the other like applications where kids actually could have like wild opportunities because they're allowed access to passion and experiences that are so critical for human development and success in a future that, fingers crossed, like bearing like, you know, some total disaster, like tech is going to play a major role.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I mean, I really subscribe to what all of you said. And I also know that all of us are susceptible to, we know all this that you're saying, and we try to use tech well, and we all waste time looking at dumb stuff on screens. And kids are, no smarter or dumber than we are about it, and they go down bad spots in technology also. And this the evidence around the level of dissatisfaction, anxiety, unhappiness, loneliness among kids, highly connected kids who are extremely, report being extremely lonely. That stuff is extremely concerning. And so doubling down on devices and tech-enabled connections. I mean, all the language is, of course, right about human-centered and about enabling connection and so forth, and it all makes me worry. And so the comments that you all have made about how it has to be integrated with a learning plan, how it has to be implemented in a way that it really is enabling human connection is fantastic. So folks can see that the poll just popped up. So please fill out that poll. And then I'm also going to ask my colleague Emily to join us here because she's been watching the questions and wants to put a couple of them to our guests.
And I'm just going to emphasize how important your response to that poll is. We take your feedback very, very seriously in our GLR Learning Tuesdays. And I also want to share that EdWeek just had a whole piece that I just posted in the chat again, technology and student wellness, how tech, SEL, and mental health are now linked. So just posted that again.
Thanks,
so we do have a really interesting question from our good colleague, Alvin Irby, who founded Barbershop Books. You all probably know him. And this is actually like, it crosses all kinds of areas, but specifically to EdTech. He says, how are your organizations supporting, and maybe what's your advice to small nonprofits that are innovating in the EdTech space but don't have an R&D budget, capacity, or capital to iterate and scale at the speed that the free market demands? I mean, it's a very similar question to like the small nonprofits doing great work in their community, but they have no money to do any kind of like, big evaluation, so they have no big results. But that question is like, so both like, what are your organizations doing, but also like, what's your advice to those small nonprofits?
Emily, I'll start quickly by saying that we have a large research team at Digital Promise, one of our superpowers. And we have direct tentacles and connections with the large foundations, the US government, IES, NSF, etc. We do work with a lot of smaller nonprofits, not the TLAs and the EdTech as an aside, but very often done through geographic efforts. For example, we just launched a project in Pennsylvania that's looking at science and reading and AI. Hopefully, we get funded by IES, but we do so in collaboration with community. That makes sense, right? School districts, local nonprofits, etc. So one of the best ways, at least to engage us, is to register on our website, reach out, look at our League of Innovative Schools. If there is one or two in your area, that's an amazing entry into Digital Promise.
One thing I'd share that can be a big like barrier that I think people can proactively take down are things like readiness for research and development in partnership with districts. We see a lot of Erin's done so much work here, EdTech organizations who are coming with like privacy policies that haven't like articulated how kids' data will be used, that who are like not totally willing to lean in and meet district specifications. The more you can know about those things, the easier it is to actually take down some of those initial barriers where districts might say no to sharing data. And if you get over that, you can actually ask districts like, what are your evaluation priorities? How do we do this together? I think sometimes we underestimate how often districts do have dollars for some of that evaluation work, which could be helpful to smaller organizations, particularly nonprofits.
Yeah, hi, Erin. It's great to hear from you in the chat. I love the work of barbershop books, amazing literacy materials in urban barbershops throughout the country. I think one of the things I think that's really important are some of those building blocks that Beth talked about. Like, do you have data agreements in place? Do you have privacy agreements in place? Are you clear about what the research question is? But actually, every nonprofit and tech company can meet the first tier of evidence in ESSA, which is have a logic model. Create and spend time building a logic model about what you think the outcome of your tool or intervention should be. And you actually already met a bar of evidence within ESSA. And folks can do that actually without doing any qualitative or quantitative research or RCT or anything like that. You can meet that first tier just by putting together a logic model and working through a logic model. And then I also think working through networks, whether it's the League of Innovative Schools or our great colleagues at Lean Lab, or thinking through folks who are working on literacy materials more broadly. There are coalitions that are looking for evidence-based interventions, and they're willing to actually help fund a research base in order to build up that work. So everyone can get to that first tier. I think it's not unreachable. It's a logic model. Let's get there.
Awesome. Emily, one more.
Yes. So this is, and I want to say thank you to all of our awesome panelists who've actually typed in answers to a lot of these questions, but I think this one is good because it's pretty relevant right now, from Ray Limer. I'm just going to read exactly how it is written, because it's pretty specific. Many practitioners are struggling to utilize or integrate the sheer quantity of EdTech resources that systems are purchasing for use. With the rise of HQIM being adopted by systems with an emphasis on fidelity of implementation, how can systems use data and strategic integration to ensure feasibility of EdTech usage and equitable outcomes for students? It's a very specific question, but it's very across the board relevant. We all know that.
Jean-Claude, you started with some of that, and then Jess, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Jess, you go first. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jess. Go ahead, Jess.
I'm very passionate about this topic. Like this is my jam right here.
Excellent.
And in fact, it is such a good question to ask, because what I'll often see is that like new materials are adopted, and then it's very hard to like let go of some of the old stuff. And then you have this like potpourri of materials, and the cognitive load that places on teachers is that is a lot, right? And so how do you skinny it down to what matters most in order to ensure, in the realm of literacy, although one could also apply this logic to mathematics, that you are giving kids what they need in a way that is very thoughtful, very intentional. So in literacy, you need your tier 1 core curricula that's going to tackle the upper strands of Scarborough's reading rope, and also a strong skills curriculum. And you need that for all kids, and you need your teachers well developed in it and held accountable to implementing with fidelity. But leaders also need to be held accountable, right? It bothers me when we scapegoat teachers as if like things aren't working because teachers aren't doing things. And in my experience, when teachers aren't doing things, leaders aren't doing things. And so there's the tier 1, and then figuring out, okay, and then for kids who need tier 2, what is your plan for what program you will use and why, and how you will train everyone in it, and how you will use data, both summative, formative, to help you understand which kids need that intervention with routinized intervals to assess whether or not the intervention's working. and then a strong tier 3. And it sounds so simple-ish when I talk about it this way, but like, this is not an easy thing to figure out. And my invitation to you, I'll drop my email in the chat, is to send me an email, because I've written a white paper about this recently, because so many school systems are trying to figure it out. It is no joke to ditch one curricula that's not working for kids, and that's important to get rid of that, and simply adopt a new curricula and roll that out and enable your teachers to learn to implement it well. And in the meantime, your kids still need to be learning to read, because they can't wait. And so there are ways to do this with thoughtfulness and intentionality. And I am more than happy to have a deeper conversation on that front.
That's awesome.
And I quickly, I know we're almost out of time. So
Yeah.
this is it's a big question. It's too much to get into.
The big one.
One of the things, I would suggest is that a lot of us do is feedback loops. So one data is not just a formative assessment or summative assessment data Jess is talking about, but sometimes it's teachers working with the EdTech products and making sure this iteration, this feedback loop is part of the process of implementation. There's a lot of that happening in the sector, and that's one thing we can talk about with you as well.
You all have been fantastic. Thanks so much to you, all of you.